Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you all again. I know you don't see this side of me very often at all. I've got my fire department uniform on. I don't think I've ever done a vlog with it on. I know I've had my fire department shirts, but never done this before. But I thought it fitting today being 9/11. I want to take a little time and kind of reflect on that day that the world changed, and also a day that the world stopped turning. I had just completed my very first year of firefighting when 9/11 happened. And I will tell you, that was a very emotional roller coaster of a day, as I'm sure it was for pretty much everybody around the world, especially here in the United States. Before we get to that, though, we have another very somber topic to talk about, very sad topic, and that's the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, whether you agree or don't agree with him, nobody should ever die because of their beliefs or because their beliefs go against somebody else's. I don't even know how to put it into words, some of the vile behavior that's going on out there on social media, especially with TikTok and that. And even a couple other, high profile idiots with various corporations that apparently have been dealt with, one by one, meaning losing their jobs. But the fact that people are dancing around and being happy over somebody being assassinated. This is the United States of America. It's okay to disagree with somebody. And it's okay to have two differing opinions. But because my opinion differs from yours, or I'm a conservative, you're a Democrat, we don't have to fight each other. Nobody has to die over that. But what are we doing here? Charlie Kirk was a man that went out, and his specialty was debate. That guy could debate like no other. In fact, I really enjoyed watching his YouTube videos that he had out there from various college campuses and how he would debate people. Now, did he get a little wound up from time to time? Of course, but that was part of his character. But one, he never insulted anybody. Two, he always had an open forum. Anybody that wanted to talk about anything could come down and speak with him. One thing he wouldn't tolerate, though, is people just screaming out from the audience. And he would tell these people, either get out or come down to the front. There's a microphone here. Talk to me. He always encouraged open debate. So the acts of yesterday were just vile and disgusting. Both what happened to Charlie, but also the wave of, I would call, mental illness that followed on social media, with a lot of people celebrating this. And then the other part of me thinks these people are doing this because they know it's going to get a reaction. And sometimes you can't help but wonder, even though these comments that these vile people are making are so awful and crude and just downright disgusting, you'd often wonder what the impact would be on them if there was no comments, no nothing. Basically, just they put their little video up there, and basically it's just crickets underneath. No reactions, no nothing. Sometimes that, as hard as it is, because your first instinct is to, you know what I mean? You want to go after these people because how dare you? How could you say something like that at a time like this? But that's what they want as well. That's what they're looking for. And it was just like, it kind of reminds me of The Simpsons, one of their Halloween specials, where the advertisements were like these giants destroying Springfield. And that the message was, the reason they're destroying Springfield is because everybody's paying attention to it. If you stop paying attention to it, there's no attention to be gotten anymore. That's how they got rid of these advertising giants destroying Springfield. The citizens of Springfield ignored it, and then it got louder and louder for a minute, and then nobody paid attention, and then they all just they disappeared. And sometimes when somebody says something extremely vile like that, your instant reaction is, my gosh, what kind of human being are you? Or are you even a human at all? And you want to go after that person, but that's what they want. And so I think the wiser, more appropriate approach is to just turn your back and walk away from these people. They find out over time that they can't get people riled up because of their words or their whatever they're doing. It's amazing it diffusing a lot of that stuff. Now, the other half of this, the fact that he got shot, which, I had seen it scrolling through yesterday, shortly after I got to work. That's when I found out about it. And one of the videos was up there on Facebook. And I'm going to tell y'all, man, you see that, you can't unsee it. In my line of work, I've seen some really bad things. That was way up there. And honestly, I don't think people should see that. There's an argument that people should see it because, it kind of will bring in a level of anger that makes you want to, get back at this. But that's the thing. We can't fight violence with violence either, And I think that's where, as far as conservatives and that go, or I heard a guy talk about it this morning. I was listening to a podcast on the way home. His name is Anthony Cumia. And he said, he goes, I don't know what to do. He goes, I'm internal. He goes, inside, I'm deeply angered, but he goes, I don't know what to do because if this was on the other side of the spectrum, meaning the left, he goes, there'd be a CVS, Target, Walgreens, everything would be on fire. And homes would be burning down and there'd be destruction everywhere. He goes, we're not like that. That's not what we do. But then he's like, I don't know how to respond to this either because I'm angry, but violence and destroying things isn't going to get anything accomplished either. And you can't feed into that side of the political aisle either. You can't go do what they do. And so there's a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration. And so I think from the conservative side of things, we move forward. You pick up Charlie Kirk's legacy and you move on with it. And that's the best way to keep it moving forward. If you take millions upon millions of people that admired him, that liked his work, that followed him, and maybe didn't agree with everything he said, but just was a big fan of who he was and what he stood for. All of us takes a little piece of that, picks it up, and carries it forward. That's how we move on, in my own opinion. That's how we do it. So Charlie Kirk, rest in peace, sir. That did not have to happen, and it was disgusting and vile what happened. And I hope, through all of our technology, that they do catch this individual. And from what it sounds like, it is now Thursday afternoon. It sounds like it's tightening in. They have an idea of what they're looking for now. So let's hope that they catch this individual and that justice is brought swiftly. Now, the other half of this vlog. Today's 9/11, the day that changed the world. I mean, there has been so many awful things that have happened in the last couple days. You had the fatal stabbing of Irina, I hope I pronounced her name right, with the Ukrainian girl on the train in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then you have Charlie Kirk being shot yesterday, and now today's 9/11. That's a whole lot going on. And then intermixed in all that was a school shooting yesterday as well. And all I can think of, especially from a first responder standpoint, is what are we doing here as a society? The amount of mental illness out there is just at an all-time high. And sadly, it's becoming more and more and more clear who's committing these acts of violence. And the part that I hate is it's the constant messaging that comes from the other side of the political aisle. As much as I try to look at both sides and I try to see good on both ends, this constant rhetoric on the left of constantly calling conservatives, we're the ones that are the horrible people. We're trying to take people's rights away. We're Nazis. I mean, they're calling Charlie Kirk a Nazi after the guy's been shot. I mean, what is wrong with people? And the thing is the word Nazi and all that has been so overused that I don't think these people would have a clue what a Nazi was, if even if they saw one, and it was one standing in front of them. You know, if you don't like what I say, then damn it, you're a Nazi and you want everybody's rights to be stripped away. No, that's not it. I just don't agree with what your ideas are. But you know what? When you have two people that disagree, you talk about it. You come together, and maybe you walk away from each other, not seeing eye to eye, but you had that debate. And each person got to see a little bit from either side. And maybe there's times when somebody's able to shift it to one side or the other, and there's other times when you don't. But that's okay. You don't kill somebody over that. My God, we got to stop this. And we got to get a better hand on this mental illness thing in our country, man. We got way, way, way too much of this going on. And I say that because I see it as a paramedic as well. I see it every day, you know, coming into the emergency rooms and that. It's just, it's one thing after another, and it's all young people. And we'll talk about it another day, but there's a big connection with these violent acts combined with medications like Prozac and other SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. When you put a patient into the system, all of their info shows up, including their prescriptions. Almost everybody that has a 911 call that's resulted because of their violent outcome or violent actions against somebody, or somebody gets depressed and, you know, wants to do harm to themselves or other people, every time you pull up their medical history, that they have those medications in there. And we're starting to learn now through research that those aren't good for you. There definitely needs to be a bigger look into this. But moving forward, today is 9/11, and it's a very somber day. It is every year for me. It's one of those days that, like, personally, my belief is you always want to remember it and you never want to forget it. Because when you start forgetting things like this that happen, you tend to let your guard down, and then that helps usher in new things. You got to always keep your guard up, you know, so things like this never ever happen again. You know, is it possible to prevent something like that from ever happening again? We'd like to think so, but if we walk around sleepwalking all the time, that very thing can happen again. And the other thing I will say is that the events of that day showed the world who firemen really are. The videos are everywhere. You know, you see them run year over year over year of the videos of the firefighters running towards the towers while everybody else is running away. You know, I'll never forget my very first day of fire school in the fire academy. Our instructor's name was Don Fisher. And he walks into the classroom. We're all sitting there eager to learn. A bunch of brand new firefighters. We had no idea how to fight fire, but we were ready to learn. We were hungry. We wanted to embark on this wonderful, amazing profession. And his very first question to us was, he said, what is the only animal outside of a firefighter that runs towards fire? And I bet we spent 10 minutes going around the classroom, and people were coming up from everything from grizzly bears to, you know, eagles and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, type thing. You know, people were coming up with everything. Well, nobody got it right. The answer was a moth. After all that, trying to figure it out. Moths and firefighters are the only two creatures on this planet that run towards fire. And as I said a minute ago, the FDNY that day, the fire department in New York, showed the world what the drive and the desire to help people that lies within the heart of firefighters. And also, I can't leave out the police department either, because they lost members too. But the FDNY lost 343 firefighters that day. That is a huge number. You know, a lot of those firemen went up into those towers, and some came out and some didn't. You know, I was reminded of a speaker we had at one of our award ceremonies for the fire department. It was back in 2012. And if you see these up here, that's where those came from. I have various awards that I've earned from my years in the fire service. One day we'll talk about them. Try to be modest about it, because that's not why I do this job. It's not for these. My passion and my desire to be a firefighter, to be a paramedic, is what leads to this, because I have such a desire to help people. And then every time I see these, that's somebody else that had another chance at life. Because I was there and my fellow firefighters were there. We did everything we had in our power to help a total stranger and gave them another shot at life, which is why these are here. Or maybe we went and did something else. Maybe we went out and this was Indiana in the middle of winter. Somebody that wasn't mobile, we'd go over to their house and shovel their driveway for them, so their friends and family could come by and visit. We've even been out and about driving the fire engine, ambulance, or rescue around and seen people struggling carrying groceries in, and we'll stop the engine and get out and help them carry their groceries into the house. Like, that's what we do. And that's one of the reasons why I really, really, really loved my first 12 plus years in the fire department with the City of Monticello Fire Department in Indiana, because it was such a smaller department. And we could do things like that. I'm not saying that stuff doesn't happen in big city departments like here in Orlando or Orange County, but it's a lot less likely, because you have these departments are so big that it's almost impossible to help the public anymore, because there's so many other things that you got to do. There's meet and greets with various politicians. There's you got to go to show off an engine somewhere. You got to go do this, and then you got fire calls and you got training, and it's very hard to go out and do those little things for the public, which is, the heart and soul of the fire service. And also there's fire captains and lieutenants that are being brought up that never had that experience. So they're not training their crews on how to do that, because they've never had that experience, whereas I did. And, so at the heart and soul, firefighters, we're out there to help people. And it's just like every day, when I'm out in the theme parks here in Orlando, if I can promise you, if anything were to go down, if somebody has a medical emergency, somebody gets injured, or something happens, and I'm there, whoever's in the vicinity of where I'm at is going to be in good hands, because regardless of whether Disney wants outside help or not, I'm going to help. They're going to have to put me in handcuffs, arrest me, drag me off the property, and we'll figure it out later. But I am not going to sit idly by and watch somebody that needs help. I'm not doing it. I've devoted my life to helping people. Back to 9/11, here we are at around 3:30 in the afternoon, and this was the time when my phone rang. It rang a couple of times. A lot of us on the department started calling each other, can you believe what you see on TV? Is this really happening? And so the next phone call I got was from a close buddy of mine on the department, and he said, Matt, from what I understand, the chief is starting to call people, telling everybody to get ready. They might be sending crews up to New York. And he said, just have a bag ready, get your gear ready, you'll be ready to go. And so I did. I packed everything up. I had a duffel bag packed full of clothes for, I didn't know how many days I was going to need, but I just grabbed everything I could and threw it in a big duffel bag. And then, of course, I had my fire department gear bag. Anybody that's been a fireman knows that big red gear bag you carry. And then my helmet, which is this one right here. I've had this pretty much since day one. After I got off the probie list, meaning I was no longer considered a probationary firefighter, you went from your yellow helmet to your black helmet. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in my bedroom at the edge of my bed. I had my gear bag underneath my legs. I had my duffel bag sitting next to me on my right side. And my helmet, I had my helmet in my lap similar to like this. I just had my hands over it like this. And I was watching the TV. And I was waiting for that call. And I bet I sat there like that for probably what seemed like an hour and a half. And I was in this conflict with myself because everything I was watching on TV, it was as it was unfolding, because that was after the towers had fallen and it was just chaos everywhere. And there was half of me that was just itching to get up there, because I knew that even though I'm only one person, that's still another person that can help find people, try to, work through the debris, give as much as you possibly can to try to save who you can, because you never know. Obviously we know now that they were pulling people out of there days later that were still alive, which is a miracle in and of itself. So there was the half of me that was just, I was just itching to get up there. In fact, had that phone rang and the chief called me, and if he would have said, "Hey Matt, we've decided to send you and a couple other guys up there," man, I would, before that phone would have hung up, I'd have been out the door and on my way. But then there was the other half of me that was scared out of my mind, that I wasn't sure how I was going to react if I went there and saw that in person. On TV, it looked like it looked like a movie scene. It just looked surreal. And so there was the other half of me that wasn't ready for that. And so I was in this conflict, the brave side that just, let's rush in there and help as many people as we can, and the reasoning side of, man, I don't know if I'm ready to see all this. It was an interesting couple hours of that back and forth. Now, long story short, I never went to New York. I was not selected to go, probably because I was so new at the time. Well, one of my close friends did go. His name's Kevin, and he showed me pictures a couple years later that he took when he was there. And the pictures that he showed me, just like I said, you can't imagine it looking at the pictures. So I even told him, I said, I can't imagine what that had to look like being there in person. And the way he said it was, he said that he got there, it was late at night on 9/11. It was probably like 10, 11 o'clock at night when he got there. And he said basically the firehouses all around the World Trade Center area were open for firemen that were coming in to help. Basically, they were, our house is your house, putting everybody up, and, help yourself to all the coffee you want. There's food here. I mean, it was like a giant family that had come together. And I think that's what I love about the fire service so much, is the family aspect about it. You're never a stranger in a firehouse, ever. You could be on the other side of the world, and you're always welcome inside of a firehouse. And so the firemen were very welcoming in the FDNY. And my buddy Kevin told me, he said that, he goes, for the next 2 to 3 days, he said they worked their tails off on, they called it the pile. He goes, we just worked on the pile, just moving around, trying to listen, trying to, find who we could, trying to move things. And he goes, we worked in shifts, we'd work for 8 to 10 hours, then we'd go back to a firehouse and relax for 4 to 6 hours and then go back. And he goes, we did that for a couple days. He said, I think it was on the morning of day 4, they got up in the morning and they, just like normal, like they'd done the days before, they got all their gear and they went back to work on the pile. And at that point, there was fencing set up, or basically a perimeter had been established. And now there was heavy duty security. The military was there. The FBI was there. I mean, it was just a big setup where they were only allowing certain people in and certain people out. And they had to keep tabs on everything. They had to, they wanted to know which department you were from. They wanted to know how long you were going to be there, how long you'd been working the prior days. And so come to find out the reason that happened, well, one, they had to restore order because at that point, the NIMS system hadn't been developed yet, which for those that aren't in the fire service, NIMS is the National Incident Management System. And that's how we do incident command now. And that was formed after 9/11. So NIMS and incident command and that wasn't really a thing at that point. And so, like I said, it was just everybody was working, trying to get stuff done. Well, what they found out was there were also a bunch of other yokels that had come down from other smaller departments and that didn't have the best interests in mind. And yes, they were on the pile helping in that, but they were stealing things. They were finding bits and pieces of fire equipment or maybe a helmet or something of that matter. And these pieces of shit were taking this stuff for their own collection or whatever they were going to do with it. Now, I'm sorry, if I'm looking through that pile and I see a FDNY helmet or something, I can't imagine just your brain going, yeah, I think I should keep this. I mean, so long story short, that's what caused everything to get shut down because one, this is a crime scene of enormous proportions, and you can't have people just going in there and out unchecked, possibly stealing things and artifacts and whatnot, because you gotta piece all this together like a big puzzle. And so what had happened was they had put this structure in place. They only allowed certain people in, certain people out. You had to have your credentials on you. You could only work in there for so long. And my buddy Kevin, basically, he worked for the next day, and then he said the day after that he decided to pack it up and come home after, I think it was 5 days of work. Because he said it was so intense that he's like, it wasn't like the days before where we could just come and go and work as much as we wanted. There was strict hours in that of what you could work. And so that's why he decided it was time to return home. And then the other story that I had was, like I said, during our awards ceremony, we had a lieutenant from Rescue 3. And the stories that he told during his speech, it's just, you could feel the passion and the emotion in his voice. And even he said, he goes, it didn't matter whether you were a good fireman, a bad fireman. He goes, none of that mattered. He goes, it was just, what mattered was whether or not it was your time. And just like the way he said that, because he was in Tower 2. And he was saying that while in Tower 2, you could hear the people falling, because of how awful it was way up there and there was no way out. And so some of these people decided that was it. I don't want to burn up, so this is how we're dealing with this. And so when they would leave the towers, they'd have to be very careful because you had people falling. He talked about looking around at other firemen in that lobby and just, you could see it on everybody's face that they knew this was really, really bad, that this was not going to be a good outcome. And the other thing about being in the fire service, a lot of firefighters and medics and even police officers will tell you, you just have this natural sense that's inside of you that you can tell without knowing anything else that's going on around you. You just sense danger. You can sense when something bad is about to go down. And he said you could just feel that among everybody. And so basically, he talked about after Tower 1 came down, he goes, that's when they basically made a run for it because they knew that the second tower was going to come down and they knew they didn't have a lot of time. And he just talked about how he just kept running and they got far away. And then the second one with the antenna on it came crashing down. And then that's when he said you started running again and you're trying to outrun that plume of smoke, that dust cloud from the towers falling. He then, trying to work with all that dust in the air. And then that's when he started talking about his colleagues that, in the years past 9/11, not only did you have the 343 that died that day, but now you've got other firemen and even people that live in the city that were trying to help. They started developing the cough, they call it. It's a really awful lung condition, likely brought on because of what happened, because of what was in those towers and in that dust cloud. And even my buddy back at home, in Indiana that went to help out at 9/11, he later on started developing lung problems. He's still doing good now, but he talks about from time to time that this cough, they just can't shake. And they're trying hard to figure out what this is, so they can help people. That was a day, like I said, if you were old enough to understand what was going on, very well where you were at, what you were doing, and kind of how that whole day went. And I remember that night, I remember walking outside because I was living near Purdue University at the time. I just graduated. I was a year graduated at that point. And I remember walking down to the Purdue band shell, which is near the football stadium. And there was an announcement that they were going to have a candlelight service. And I remember going down there and there were hundreds, if not thousands of students down there and just people from all over. And so myself and a couple other firefighters I work with, we went over there and people were handing candles out. And we just stood there with candles lit in the dusk of night, just trying to figure out what the heck happened that day because the whole day was just surreal. And then the other thing is no planes in the air. It was just such a eerie quiet that day. I'll never forget it. That's my story of things, having been a fireman. Like I said, 9/11 happened on my very first year. And every year I always pay tribute to it, just by taking a little bit of time and reflecting. And now that I have this YouTube channel, every year I put the uniform on for a little bit and chat with the camera. There's not going to be any uploads of theme park vlogs, nothing like that today. Today is just kind of a somber moment. And not only for 9/11, but with Charlie Kirk and Irina, the Ukrainian girl that was living here in the States that was savagely murdered on that train. And so, and the school shooting that also took place in the middle of all of that. So we've got to do better as a nation, and we got to stop with this violence, man. We got to stop with this violence. And the answer to violence isn't with violence either. You like I've said early on when I started this vlog, sometimes the best medicine for it is to just not pay attention to these people making the most noise. But also you need to be able to have open debate in a public forum without worrying about losing your life. I think that's the other thing that just pisses me off to the core is, all he was doing was debating people. That was it. There was no insulting going on, but this constant rhetoric that gets put out there that, he's coming to take all your rights away and all this other stuff, which isn't true, but you get a bunch of people that are already jazzed up, from various medications and everything else, and then you start feeding them that constant diatribe of negative messaging. What's that going to do to people? And then plus with social media 24/7, if you're already having some troubles, that is going to send your mind into overdrive. And that somehow, some way that we got to get away from that. And like I said, when these vile people post these god awful remarks, about Charlie Kirk, or I've even seen him about 9/11. I've seen people post awful things about 9/11, saying horrible things. The best medicine to that is no reaction at all, because that's what these people want. They want that. They crave it. Otherwise, they wouldn't put it out there. So just like with the Simpsons Halloween special and the giant advertisements that were walking around destroying Springfield, once they stopped paying attention to them, they were done. They were gone in seconds. They just disappeared because there was nothing they could do because nobody was paying attention to them anymore. Good talk, everybody. Before we wrap this up, I'm going to put this clip in right here. It's a really nice compilation that was put together. I found it on YouTube. It's a really good video that honors the 343 firefighters that lost their lives in 9/11. And so we're going to wrap this up with that video. So with that, we'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Take care. God bless. Always remember, never forget.